January 2nd, 1777. Trenton, New Jersey. George Washington sits on his horse at the south end of a narrow stone bridge, watching 8,000 British and Hessian soldiers close in on a town he cannot afford to lose. Behind him, the Assunpink Creek is the only thing standing between his army and total destruction. Ahead of him, the most powerful force the British Crown has sent against him this winter is one bridge crossing away. 1 week earlier, Washington had done the impossible. He crossed the icy Delaware River in a storm, hit the Hessian garrison at Trenton before dawn, and walked away with nearly 900 prisoners, without losing a single man in the fighting. It was the first real victory of the war for an army that had spent 6 months losing. But General William Howe, furious in New York, had a fix for that. He pulled General Charles Cornwallis off a ship bound for England, handed him 8,000 men, and sent him south with a single order: end this. Cornwallis did not expect a war. He expected a correction. His force outnumbered Washington's by close to a third, and unlike the militia filling out the American ranks, his men were professional soldiers, trained, equipped, and rested. Washington's army, by contrast, was a patchwork. Barely 1,500 of his men were full-time Continentals. The rest were New Jersey and Pennsylvania militia, farmers and tradesmen who had picked up a musket because Robert Morris had scraped together enough money to pay them $10 to stay 1 more month. Their enlistments had expired 2 days earlier. Most of them had agreed to stay only because Washington had asked them to their faces. Cornwallis expected to find that army cornered, exhausted, and finished. He was about to learn that Washington had spent the entire day making sure of exactly that, on purpose. His name was George Washington, Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, 44 years old, and by January of 1777 he had lost more battles than he had won. New York had fallen. Fort Washington had fallen. His army had been chased across New Jersey all autumn, bleeding men to disease, desertion, and expiring enlistments. He had watched Congress flee Philadelphia. He understood something most commanders in his position would never admit. A war this lopsided could not be won by outfighting the British. It had to be won by outlasting them, by surviving long enough and striking sharp enough that the cost of the war became unbearable to the men paying for it back in London. That insight is the hinge of everything that follows tonight. Washington also understood his own army's weakness better than anyone. Militia broke under pressure, not from cowardice, but because they had never been trained to stand in a battle line while men died next to them. So instead of asking them to win a fight in the open, he built a defense that didn't require it. On December 30th, he marched his army back into Trenton and put it behind a creek. His opposite number was no fool. Charles Cornwallis was an experienced, capable British general, one of the better field commanders the Crown had in America. He had been preparing to sail home for the winter when the news from Trenton reached London's ears in New York. His leave was cancelled within hours. He rode through the night to reach his command at Princeton. Cornwallis's logic was simple and, on paper, sound: trap the rebels against a river with a superior force, and the war effectively ends here. He had no reason yet to doubt that logic. Pay attention to how Washington spent the hours before Cornwallis arrived. They mattered more than the battle itself. Looking down at Trenton from above, the position resembles a shallow bowl. The Delaware River runs along the western edge. The Assunpink Creek cuts east to west just south of town, narrow but steep-banked, crossable at only a few points. Washington placed his main army on the high ground south of that creek, anchored on a stone bridge, the obvious crossing, and the one he reinforced the heaviest. Every piece of that defense had a purpose. 40 cannons, an enormous number for an army this size, were massed to cover the bridge directly. The most reliable infantry held the line closest to the crossing. Behind them, the militia held supporting positions where a single bad moment wouldn't break the whole line. And out front, miles up the road toward Princeton, Washington placed a thin screen of his best troops, not to win a fight, but to lose time. That screen was commanded by Colonel Edward Hand of the 1st Pennsylvania Regiment, a veteran rifleman who had fought through nearly every major engagement of the war so far. The man originally assigned to that post, a French volunteer general named Fermoy, had gotten drunk and abandoned it. Hand inherited the job without warning, with roughly 1,000 men, and somehow that accident became the most important command decision of the entire battle. From the British perspective, marching south that morning, everything looked routine. Scouts and light infantry up front, the main columns behind, artillery rolling along a frozen, rutted road. They expected a clear march and a fight before lunch. What they got instead was an ambush every half mile. Riflemen firing from tree lines, falling back, then doing it again at the next ravine. Hand's men were never trying to stop the British. They were trying to make them stop, again and again, until the sun started going down. It worked. An 11-mile march that should have taken half a day swallowed almost the entire daylight hours. By the time Cornwallis's advance guard reached the outskirts of Trenton, the light was already failing. Set your clock now, because it starts here. Washington needs the British stalled until dark. He gets exactly that, and what happens in the next several hours will determine whether his army survives the war. Around 5 in the evening, the British finally broke through to the creek itself. Hand's exhausted rearguard scrambled across the stone bridge under fire, and Washington rode out into the chaos personally, sitting his horse calmly in the open while cannon fire cracked around him, making sure every last man got across before the bridge became a kill zone. Then the real attack began. Hessian grenadiers came forward first, bayonets fixed, straight at the narrow bridge, the only direct crossing into the American position. American gunners, given orders to fire low, raked the column at point-blank range. The first assault broke apart in the road. Cornwallis sent a second wave. That one broke too, soldiers tumbling into the freezing creek to escape the artillery fire raking the bridge deck. A third assault followed, and a third collapse followed with it, bodies stacking up in a space barely wide enough for 2 wagons to pass. Within the space of one evening's fighting, the British and Hessian forces lost several hundred men dead, wounded, or captured attacking that single bridge. American losses, by comparison, stayed in the dozens. That gap, close to 10-1 by some counts, is the kind of number historians double-check before they print it. As darkness fully settled in, Cornwallis pulled his men back to camp on the high ground above town. His officers wanted to press the attack immediately, in the dark, while the Americans were still reeling. Cornwallis said no. He had seen the bridge fail 3 times already, and he didn't need to gamble in the dark when morning would do just as well. Washington's army was boxed in by a creek in front and a river behind. There was nowhere left to run. "We've got the old fox safe now," he reportedly told his staff. "We'll go over and bag him in the morning." He had every reason to believe that. He was wrong by sunrise. Because while the British camp settled in for the night, certain they had Washington cornered. Washington had already called his generals together south of the creek. The decision they reached that night is the reason this battle is remembered at all. Rather than wait to be crushed by daylight, Washington chose to disappear, to march his entire army around Cornwallis's flank under cover of darkness and strike the lightly held British supply base at Princeton before dawn. It should not have been possible. Moving thousands of men at night, silently, past an enemy camp close enough to see their fires, was the kind of maneuver that fell apart in training, let alone in real war. But Washington had one advantage Cornwallis didn't know about: a back road, barely more than a farm track, that looped wide around the British position and came out behind it. The order went out just after midnight. Wrap wagon wheels in cloth and rags to silence them. Muffle every axle. Leave the campfires burning, and keep a skeleton crew feeding them, so any British sentry looking south saw exactly what he expected to see: an American army still dug in, waiting for morning. Then, in near total silence, the rest of the army began moving east and north, away from the creek, away from the British camp, onto a frozen back road that Cornwallis had never bothered to guard. For hours, thousands of men marched in the dark within a few miles of an enemy force 3 times their size, and no one raised the alarm. The ground had frozen hard enough that the road, which had been an impassable swamp of mud 2 days earlier, now held weight without breaking apart. a stroke of weather Washington could not have planned for, and one his army badly needed. By the time the sun came up, Cornwallis's men formed up along the Assunpink Creek, ready to finish the fight they'd started the night before. They found an empty camp. The fires were still burning. The American army was gone. Whether Cornwallis fully grasped what had happened in those first minutes is something historians still debate. But within hours, the sound of his own artillery would tell him. 11 miles to the north, Washington's army was already attacking the British garrison left behind at Princeton. What happened that morning is its own story. What matters here is the door it walked through. If Washington's stand at the creek had broken even once, if the bridge had fallen on the second assault instead of holding through 3, there would have been no night march, no Princeton, and quite possibly no army left to fight on through 1777. Historians have compared Washington's strategy across these 10 days to Fabius Maximus, the Roman general who beat a stronger enemy by refusing to give him the fight he wanted. The comparison holds up. Survival, not conquest, was the entire plan. The 2 victories at Trenton, 8 days apart, did something raw battlefield wins rarely manage. They convinced soldiers whose enlistments were expiring to stay. They convinced state militias that the war wasn't already lost. And they convinced officers in London, slowly, that this conflict would not end quickly or cheaply, a realization that would shape British strategy and the war's length for years afterward. Today, the ground where that bridge once stood sits inside a quiet city park in Trenton, New Jersey, a small stone marker, a walking path, and a creek that still runs the same course it did in 1777, mostly unnoticed by the cars passing a few hundred feet away. Nothing about it suggests it was once the single most important half-mile of road in the Revolutionary War. For one night in January, the entire future of an army came down to a few feet of frozen creek bank and a road no one thought to guard. If you want more stories like this one, battles history almost forgot, and the decisions that turned them, subscribe to Bastion History. There's another one waiting.